Hi, everybody. This is Ellen Slayter, and I'm the CEO and founder of RevCap. We're a content marketing agency that specializes in HR, tech, financial services, and insurance. Or as I like to tell people, I market to the most risk-averse people on earth. That's my real specialty. Before I started RevCap, I was director of content development at SmartBrief, and even before that, I was a traditional journalist where I worked as a columnist and a financial editor at the Washington Post. And because of this, many people come to me often with their PR questions and are often surprised to learn that I don't actually like to do PR that much. There's a very light kind of thought leadership strategy type work I like to do. But when I have heavy duty PR work that needs to be done, I call in an expert. And since our topic today is about PR and content marketing and how we like to work together, I called in my favorite expert on PR, especially in HR tech. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Jeanne, here, because I learned some things in reading this bio that I did not know before, like that you worked at Ceridian. In my mind, you've just always been doing PR. Like you were in product at Ceridian. So tell us a little bit about like how your background, your story, and how you
Oh
came to
yeah,
be.
well, first of all, it's great to see you, and I love our conversations, and I know our audience is really gonna take away some great learning points today. Yes, I used to work at Ceridian, and before that, I worked for a company called Insi, and Insi was the granddaddy of the HRMS. I mean, we're talking back in the mainframe days. I
Mm-hmm.
was, of course, a mere child. But I then went on to run product management at Ceridian, bringing payroll and HR onto the same platform. It was way before its time. Technology couldn't really support successful deployment of that. Um, in my frustration, though, I said, there are a lot of broken workflows out in the business world. And ironically, one of them was PR. And I used to sit across the table, the suits would come in, as we call them, from the PR agency, and they'd sell us everything's going to be great. You're going to be on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. And then, like 3 months later, I'd be talking to some junior person assigned to our account who was like struggling with what's the difference between a CFO and a CTO. So that's how the Devon Group started way back when. But I actually did have a life before the Devon Group.
Wow, it's like I can't even imagine. Like, is product Like, I have questions.
Yes, real. I mean, we're talking like, sitting and designing product and working with. I had a fabulous engineering team, and I was in Minneapolis. They were in Atlanta, like a team of sixty people. Yeah, it was hardcore. It was in the
Mhm.
trenches stuff. It was great education.
Yeah, but I do think that knowledge, I can, now that I know that actually makes sense to me because I think about the way that in many cases you do approach PR in this industry specifically in a very sophisticated, nuanced way that I think would be very difficult for somebody who hadn't done that work. I think that I can still
Thank
kind of
you
see
for
the
that.
glimmers of it now. Now that I see that, like that makes sense to me.
Well, that's exactly why, though, we are not a good fit for someone who's just looking for what we would call in the PR industry a flack. And that is somebody who's just going to pound the press, pound the press, pound the press, and not do the work to really build relationships, to really understand, what the journalist is looking for, how we can be an editorial resource, how we can bring in the right clients to be editorial resources. So, having been at the Washington Post, I mean, you
Yeah.
know what it's like to get like endless phone calls, endless emails that have absolutely nothing to do with your beat. And
Oh.
like, you can't possibly, from a volume standpoint, even respond to all of these. It's just irritating. We try not to be irritating.
Is that your tagline? Is that
That's
your new
our,
website
I think
tagline?
that's our new
The Devon
tagline. I
Group.
have to talk to the team about
Right,
that.
right, right. I'm singing now. The Devon Group. We try not to be
That's right.
irritating. So let's talk. Let's talk. What are we going to talk about today? So obviously we could talk for hours. To some degree, this conversation came out of Jeanne and I will just periodically check in with each other and like, hey, how's it going over there? How are you doing? Sometimes we have clients that overlap, sometimes they're not, but like we just like to check in every once in a while. And so this conversation emerged kind of out of that. And like the three things we wanted to kind of talk through today were one, when does PR make sense? Because Jeanne and I are both noticing there's a thing that's happening where people are under pressure to cut their marketing budgets. And since PR is often put under that budget, they're just cutting it. And I think without any real regard to like the long-term impact that that's going to have. So, but there's times that it makes sense. And there's also times that PR doesn't make sense. So we're going to talk about that. Like, how do you decide when you need to keep spending that money, right? And investing in that work and those relationships. Two, how to know when your idea is worthy of pitching. Because I think one of the other weird things that's happening right now is because people are under this pressure and to make things very business and serious. And so suddenly it's like, we'll do PR, but the PR has to be about our product. And I'm like, okay, well, I can't, no one can pitch that. So how do you know when it is something like when you, but the team always jokes with me that whenever something comes up, it's like, they go, oh, well, that's interesting. And that's like the journalist in me that has suddenly heard something
Yes,
new. And,
exactly. You have a thread to pull on. Like
ooh,
there's
I have
something you can
something,
make a story out of.
it's
Yeah,
called an angle. Like,
exactly.
and
Exactly.
then not surprisingly, because it's the two of us here, we're going to talk about how to use the PR and the content marketing to work together. So it's like, let's say you've been asked to do more with the team and with both. There's a way that you can bring those together to make sure that you're amplifying, so the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. You
Exactly.
can amplify, so you get more ROI out of both. So that's the three areas we're going to cover. Feel free to drop chat, like questions in the chat. We'll answer them as they come up, or toward the end. But those are kind of the three areas we're going to go. And I'm going to start here right out of the gate. Jeanne, I'm going to answer this question in the reverse because you take these calls all the time. When should you get rid of PR? When should you not do PR?
You should. That's a great question. And, one of the things that people who call us find counterintuitive is sometimes we turn people down. They come to us and they're like, we want to hire you, blah, 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 blah. And I listen and I'm like, you know what? We are not the right resource for what you're trying to accomplish here. This PR is not the right tool in the toolkit for what
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to accomplish. And of course, as you know, Mary Ellen, then I send those people to you. Um,
Right. So what's the criteria? What's the
right, because
criteria?
because first of all, PR is a long game. It's a build process, it's a long game, it's influence, it's having a steady stream of newsworthy information. It's not a one and done. It doesn't fit in like a project plan where we can just do it in a 1 month period of time and then measure it and say, okay, we're done. Um, it is not uncommon for a journalist to call us 8 months after we send something out and say, you know what, I saved this. It's great. I want to write the story now.
Mm-hmm.
So if you on the client side have only committed 1 month to that PR campaign, guess what? We oftentimes can't even find you anymore. So, you have to be all in. And I always warn companies that once you turn it on, it's like an extra job. It takes on a life of its own. Sometimes you will be flooded with opportunities. Then there'll be, a dry spell. Then there'll be more opportunities. But it's very much a build process. It also has to be, we have to have the right resources on the client side who
Mm.
can manage the PR program. And so that's not and is absolutely not saying anything negative about our newer entrants into the workplace, but that often needs to have some level of executive support and then a manager or director resource who is accustomed to working with the press. I can tell you, and you know this yourself firsthand, the press is not there to represent your interests. They are there to represent the readership of their respective publication.
Mm-hmm.
They are not going to do what you want. If you want to call them after the fact, after the article appears, and say, well, we want you to add a whole bunch more adjectives. And oh, by the way, link back to our website. That's a really great way to never work with the press again.
I'll
So,
block you in the
yeah,
same. This is even that I would block
yeah,
for that so fast. Like
yes,
you would be that there. We don't talk to you
exactly.
again. We're like,
Exactly.
mm-mm.
Exactly. People will say to me, well, why is so and so always in the press? Well, they're in the press because, first of all, they've taken the time to media train their spokespersons. So their spokespersons understand how to tell a story and how to tell it in a way that it's interesting. They also have support for their stories. So that might mean data. It might mean, might mean a library of images. I'm always amazed at how many companies don't have proper photos of their
Of their
executives.
executives.
We're
High res, by
talking
the way,
basics.
high res photos.
Exactly, high res. We got asked for a high res photo this morning, and your LinkedIn profile photo is not high res. We can only Photoshop so much. I mean, so
Right.
yeah, so we look at, listen, if you're going to lift off the program, you've got to stick with it for a while. You've got to be committed. You've got to have the resources at your end. And the other thing to remember is PR. We usually report into the CMO. That's usually where the budget resides. But PR also touches issues and crisis communications. It touches employer brand. It touches investor relations. And that's not just for publicly held entities. It could be if you're trying to raise, funding, it's going to talk to the investment community. So we have a very multifaceted, multi-audience challenge that we deal with.
Mm-hmm. So going back to even that time frame, I mean, I'll tell you what I typically tell people if PR is something they're thinking about. You mentioned that patience thing. I tell them if they don't have 6 to 18 months, don't bother. If they're not
100%.
willing to spend, it's a
100%.
minimum of 6 months because it takes
100%.
because you're spreading an idea
Yes.
and
Right.
you're building relationships, and it's pretty hard to build relationships any faster than that with the press. Like even
Yeah.
and that is kind of my take on it. That's assuming you have that foundational stuff in place. And I think it's okay to build that stuff as you're going, but you have to be willing to put the time in. I think that surprises people.
We are always putting the wheels on the bus as it's moving forward. So, and we're not afraid of that. But we are very respectful of the fact that this is an influence. It's a science of influence. And you are asking people who are gatekeepers to very valuable audiences to bring your message forward. So they become the conduit to the audience, but you have to be enormously respectful of them. And sometimes, things happen. They might be interested and then they might ghost you. Or they're interested, but then, a large vendor makes a big announcement and their attention goes elsewhere. There are a lot of things that happen in PR. It is very much a relationship management situation. So we're not, it's always also the challenge when you look at measuring it. You can measure share of voice, you can measure sentiment analysis, but it doesn't quite fit as neatly into, we can actually figure out how much website traffic we got from
Right.
XYZ in the press.
But they sure want that. Like,
Yes.
I mean, I can
Yes.
give you some backlinks.
Yes.
I find that if anything, PR tends to get underweighted, like in terms of when the value gets calculated. I think it kind of gets under, and because it goes on for so long, like if you run a good PR campaign, it does create sustainable value, and it runs for long after that PR campaign stopped. That's
Yes.
something, if you do it right,
If you do it right, to your point, and everyone wants to measure everything nowadays, and I can appreciate that. I mean, I'm very data driven, and I want to measure everything too. But when, for example, an industry analyst refers business to you because you have taken the time to really cultivate a deep relationship with that analyst or influencer, and they're involved in RFPs and they're involved in vendor selection, and they turn around and bring you into a deal, where do you measure that? If that deal is $250,000, where does that measurement go? And that's an offshoot of PR. I mean, that's part of that relationship management play.
Oh, attribution, my favorite. It's like, oh, I know. It's like, when did they hear about you and how did they hear about you? It's
Right.
funny too, like you mentioned, thinking about the relationship with the reporters and the fact when they need to drop you. Maybe journalists are probably the original ghosters. Like we are the original ghosters. We probably
100%, Marielle. I mean,
because we have all the daily, because I also thought about this in the context of something that in our work where somebody said something about, this is great if you don't mind like same day deliverables. And I'm like, what types of deliverables aren't same day? Like that's all I ever knew. It's like whatever I was doing at noon was thrown out the window at 2. It's like it conditions you.
Exactly.
So being empathetic actually about the people that you're contacting and that you're pitching, because there is a good chance they may have to drop something and they might have nothing to do with you and nothing to do with them. I mean, imagine for a second that you were somebody pitching something in marketing that was related to anything besides Chat GPT.
Mhm.
the last week of December.
Exactly.
You were
Exactly.
done. There was
You had
nothing for you.
There was nothing for you.
There-
Exactly. So that, going back to the idea of pitching product, if you're strictly going to pitch product and you're not pitching, who you are, what you do, voice of your customer, hopefully some relevant survey data, if you're just going to lead with pitching product, well, a journalist only has so many places to put a product story. And quite frankly, over the years, and I've been at this game a long time. I remember when we actually had product labs at some of the publications. You could actually get your product in the lab and they would test it and then write a review of it. All of that is gone. It is gone. So you have
you have
got
to
to tell.
pay.
You
You have
you
to
have to
pay for
pay.
that.
You have to pay for that. Exactly. Now you have to pay for it, or you have to tell your story through the customer experience to make it relevant to the readership of the publication.
So let's dig into that for a second. What does that mean when you say you have to tell it through the customer experience? Because this is a thing I have to do in the content too. But how would you describe that from a PR lens?
Well, and so here's the gating item right out of the from the get-go. Um, in your world, perhaps you're writing a fabulous customer case study that's going to be you published at your customer's website.
Mm-hmm.
In my world, that gorgeous case study, which is, so valuable to us, unless that customer is willing to speak to a journalist and take press interviews, we really can't use it. We can point to it, but any journalist is going to say, "Oh, that's a really interesting story. I'd like to talk to that customer." And that's where things fall apart between the content of the website and PR. You have to have that level of engagement from your customers who are willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with you and validate what's been said in the case study about the wonderful results that have been generated by this product.
I think so. To pick up on that for just a second, too, because I think this comes up with something else that's related. I think we're talking about PR in the sense of media, but speaker placements often
Yes.
fall in the same category.
Yes.
So when people come, because they'll come to me too, and they think I'm PR. We want to get speaker placements, and we want to
Yes.
get media articles. How does that play out in speaker pitches too? When you are putting somebody out as a thought leader and you're trying to get them on stage, how
Yeah.
did the client thing usually plays a factor there too?
They do. And so, at Devon, we have kind of a unique perspective of PR. We do analyst relations, media relations, speaker bureau, and awards marketing. So when we look at speaker bureau, we're looking at earned speaking opportunities that are, in other words, the speaker is not paying to be on
Mm-hmm.
stage. So what makes that speaker attractive? Well, certainly the speaker's own credentials, but 99% of the time, it's because that speaker can bring one of their customers into the mix, either to be on stage with them or to be part of a panel discussion. And that's how the conference organizers gain access, again, to the voice of the customer in the industry. So that is super important. But if you don't have that engagement with your customers, and yeah, I'm using the word engagement. So certainly there's the emotional connection to your champion within your customer. But there's also sometimes we literally ask our clients, please put this in a contract. Please put in the contract, when you're in the honeymoon phase and everybody's signing off on those contracts, put a paragraph in there saying, hey, we will do one press release, we will do one case study, we will do one speaking engagement. At least try to get that in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we are then able to make those assets available to the conference organizers and those thought leaders get on stage.
Mm-hmm. So how do you know? And this kind of actually goes into the second question I was going to ask you. How do you tell when an idea is interesting? Because I always look at it as have you given me something novel? Is there a fresh angle here? Like I'm listening for something from my perspective. I'm like I need something fresh to write about. No one's going to read your 5 best practices to do payroll. Right? No one wants your 5 tips to recruit
Yeah.
in a downturn.
Right.
Nobody wants. I mean, it's like I don't care what you think about quiet quitting, quiet promoting,
Right.
quiet whatever we're calling it now. It's like I don't care unless you're Anthony Klotz himself. I don't care what you have to say about quiet quitting.
It is
But
so
how do
funny.
you tell? How do you tell? What makes that light go off for you? Like that
Well,
I can work with this.
you
Like,
know, because we have this it's a very interesting, you just brought all that up because one of our staffers was on an interview yesterday with a journalist from Vox who said those exact words, like, I have had it with quiet quitting, quiet this, quiet that,
Quiet
re-
promotions. We forgot about quiet
rage
promotions. Like,
applying, like, stop it already, stop it, and so we have a front row seat to what the journalists want because we're talking to them every day. And they, as you know, are not shy about letting us know what they think is BS and what they think is a compelling angle. Now, that there's some yin and yang to that because sometimes we push back on them, especially given because we're so steeped in the HR tech category, and because we do have, a technical background in product. We can say to them, yeah, you really don't want to go in that direction. That was kind of done to death 2 years ago. You
mhm,
want to think maybe in this direction instead. Um, and I'm always surprised at how the light bulbs go on. I'm also surprised when we sit with clients and we say to them, hey, it's Black History Month, or hey, next month is International Women's Day. And they're like, it is? Really? I feel like the Hallmark
right?
store of HR holidays, but it's like you got to kind of tease things out, and then people realize they're sitting on a gold mine that they're not marketing, and I
Mhm,
mean, whether PR is the right medium to get it out to the market, or content marketing is, they haven't even thought about it. So from an
mhm,
ideation standpoint, we do a lot of work with clients, kind of teasing things out and saying, hey, you have a diverse leadership team. What are you doing to let people know that? So it's truly amazing what comes out when you have those
mhm.
conversations.
I think for me too, it's often that people, I know that y'all know how I got this hard. It was from being a journalist, actually. This
That's
is how I
it.
got
Oh,
this
you
way.
you have a tough skin.
This is
Yeah,
how I
we
got
both
like
do.
this. But like for me, what I'm usually listening for when I'm talking to the clients is that thing that they are experts on and that they get excited about, that they often don't even recognize it as such. And we get in people get in their heads about what they think is important and what they think is serious and what they think is like worthy to talk about for the business. And they're often not really the things that actually matter. So I'm listening for excitement in their voices, right? I'm listening for something new and interesting that I haven't heard before, and I've heard a lot at this point. I've heard a lot of things. I don't care about the future of work either. Like, don't care about it. Um, it happened. This is where
Hashtag
we are now.
FOW.
It's over. It's
Yeah,
over.
yeah,
This is now the post-apocalyptic of work. Like we are
yes,
now. Like,
yeah.
so what I'm listening for, like David Baker has a saying, like it kind of often refers to this, is it's hard to read your label from inside your own jar.
Yes.
And so that I want to unlock because, like much as you were saying, there's often all this really great stuff inside the organization, but people are like holding it back. The people who have the most interesting things to say are often the quietest ones
Mhm.
and just require some coaching to feel more confident in what they're saying and like how they position it. The loudest people in your organization are not necessarily inherently the most interesting just because they most desire the public spotlight and to communicate with the press does not mean that they are your best spokespeople.
Well, exactly, because they're also not necessarily well matched from a chemistry standpoint. But you've raised some interesting points. I just want to take a moment
Yeah, yeah.
to chat about them. One of the things we do when we start a client engagement is media training, and you'd
Mm-hmm.
be surprised what comes out in media training. I have seen the most senior, we're talking CEO level, come unglued during media training. And
Mm-hmm.
this is an excellent opportunity for us to either determine, does this person need coaching?
Do
What
they need
needs to happen?
therapy?
Do
Do
they
they
need
need
therapy?
therapy?
Sometimes, or or and this happens a lot. Sometimes they shouldn't be a spokesperson. They just shouldn't. They're not the right resource. The other thing, though, in terms of what gets people excited, this goes back to my own roots. I started my career as a salesperson. I actually studied to be a teacher, but there were no teaching jobs when I came out. And so I actually started in sales. I find getting close to the source the most important thing. So being able to talk to the salespeople is so important. They will tell you what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting who has a meltdown and who goes on, like who turns out. You can just be surprised. You will be very surprised at who your real spokespeople are, and don't assume that they all have C in their title. One thing
Exactly.
too, I often think about you can de-risk that somewhat by don't limit your media training only to like your CEO. If you have any kind of wiggle room in your budget, begin to give soft opportunities to other director level and above people. Like it can't be super junior, but if you've got people that show promise, this is actually like a pretty cool way to develop your future talent. Like this is a way to get them comfortable with that kind of work. And it makes them feel special
I
if it's done
agree.
right.
From a career development standpoint, first of all, I want to apologize for coughing in everyone's ear. I'm not sure how
We
much
didn't
of
hear
that I
it.
was
I
able
think
to
you
block.
turned it off.
Okay, I was
We're good.
fast. I was fast. Okay, sometimes the
Yeah.
fingers aren't that fast. Um, I'm totally tracking with you on that because I feel this is a career development opportunity that sometimes is better assigned. You might have somebody who's a great spokesperson who, by the way, might really be able to go deep on product and is close enough to the customer that they're hearing that narrative as well. And that might be your best spokesperson. Um, Oftentimes, we tell the CEO, come into the conversation at the very beginning, introduce yourself, establish the relationship, and then do a handoff to whomever is going to be the spokesperson on the interview. Because oftentimes it is not the CEO who's the right spokesperson.
Mm-mm. Sometimes they'll insist on it though. So you will also encounter situations so match it to the opportunity. So I think this is probably one of the things if the Wall Street Journal does want to talk to you, they probably do want to talk to like your CEO or your CHRO. That's being
100%.
real.
Yes.
If it's
Yes.
one of your trade publications, that's a good opportunity for a director or a VP
Yes.
to stretch a little in a probably pretty safe way. And I would say whatever industry you're in, like figure out who your PR, who your media people are
Hmm.
in your space and your trade. Go just connect with them or follow them on LinkedIn. Don't spam them, don't pitch them, don't do anything weird. But that's also a great way for you to just kind of keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening. So if you're interested in that, like go follow those people. Most of them are pretty interesting and they post regular things that are both their
Exactly.
news, so you can find out their beat.
You can find out their beat. You can also find out what makes them tick and what their
Mm-hmm.
frustrations are. I find pretty much every journalist is on Twitter, first of all. So that has an immediacy that some of the other social media channels don't give to us. And they will air their frustrations. So I mean, quite
Yes.
frankly, sometimes you can play right off the back of that
Mm-hmm.
because they're putting it out there. They're starting the conversation, so you can come into the conversation. There is a timeliness element of PR, and people get
Yes.
very frustrated. I'll give you an example. The jobs report came out. We saw a flurry of coverage about the jobs report. I've had probably 3 or 4 customers in our client portfolio say to me, okay, we will be issuing our response to the report in the beginning of March. And I always think, what part of this news cycle thing are you not getting? The jobs report came out. That is the heightened interest level is at that time. It's not a month later. A month later, the press has moved on to something else.
Wow. Yeah. I guess I would say that actually, I'm glad you mentioned that because I think the timeliness becomes an issue, even in the very lightweight thought leadership PR stuff that we do. If I pitch somebody on you doing an idea and then you take a month to
Right.
finalize the copy, I can no longer find a place for that.
Exactly.
Even
Exactly.
they're like, but it's evergreen. And I'm like, yeah, but they don't care anymore. And
E-
now we've also established, like, it's actually, I kind of took a ding for it because I
Exactly.
put you out there and said they're looking to solve a problem that day, that week.
Hmm.
Like,
Right.
that's it. That's it. And like, it's
Yeah.
after that,
It's
I'm
one.
going to have a harder time next time.
Well, that's it too. You're compromising the relationship that took so long to build with that journalist. Or it's a bit frustrating. One of the things we try to get our clients to align with is this whole concept of available for interview. So is that spokesperson that we have now groomed on your team, can we make that person available for interview at a moment's notice? So if something happens, and it's 8:30 in the morning and the story just crossed Wall Street Journal, by 9:30 we are pushing out that your spokesperson is available for interview. That's
Hmm.
another thing that's different about, PR is we operate in news cycles. We don't get do-overs. And to your point, if it takes too long for us to get something to someone, they've moved on. And
Right.
because they see everyone as an editorial resource, think of how annoying it is if somebody promised you a photo or an image or something and you told them Thursday was your deadline and you get back to them 3 weeks later. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I mean,
Hmm.
so I think that's another thing though, Mary Ellen, that makes PR a little scary. People feel like, oh, I have more control over my other marketing tools. PR could be a little more like the wild, wild west.
And if control is important to you, this is probably not the right medium. Like, it's not.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just not
Exactly.
going to work because you have so little control over so much of it. Um, I was thinking, kind of going back, actually thinking about how we, actually, I lost my thought on that. I'll come back to it later. We did have an interesting question here from one of our folks where they're asking how we measure this and how do we communicate ROI, which I think is a fair question. It's like, so let's say you've got somebody. So first of all, I got to tell you, Laura, you asked this question. I no longer personally work with people who come to me and ask me to do things for them and then also ask me to defend it and explain the ROI of it. I think that's because I'm 45 years old now. And I've been doing this for 20 years. And if I have to sell you on content marketing, I'm not going to do this, right? Like, it's on you to have figured out that that's part of your strategy. I don't know. Jeanne, are you that grouchy about it? Or do you do like an explanation of, like, for PR? Do you walk them through how to measure the ROI of PR if
Well,
they
I
aren't
am
told?
I am now not going to mention how old I am because you're like a youngster compared to me. So I'm feeling a
My
bit of,
powers will only grow, is what I'm hearing from this conversation.
well, one does get grouchier and a bit short tempered. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Listen, I'm not here to sell people on the power of PR. Um, Usually, we are working with a very qualified buyer who has implemented PR other places in their career, and they understand the power of it. In terms of how do you measure it, well, here I can throw out a couple of different ways you can measure it. And by the way, you can subscribe to 80 gazillion different tools that are going to measure all this. But I come from a technology background. I mean, like old Unix programmer. So yeah, I'm a little annoying with these tools vendors because some of the business logic is pretty lightweight. But here are some of the things you can do. First of all, you can capture your number of media appearances and you can include the circulation numbers of those publications. And some people do that and they report that on the board level and they go and say, hey, we were in Yahoo Finance and 23 billion people read this article. Well, they didn't. And that's one of the reasons we at Devon don't like that metric because those people might have gotten it in a Google alert. That doesn't mean they clicked on the article. It doesn't mean they read and then took action in terms of your news. So meaningless measurements, although that's kind of, where a lot of people land in terms of measuring PR, really don't matter. So one of the things we're focused on would be share of voice. So taking a look at the competitive landscape and you know what the pressures are competitively speaking, you know who your competition is. Let's take a look at how you're stacking up there. Sometimes some vendors in share of voice have an unfair advantage. I'll mention one, I won't mention the brand, but they have Prince Harry as one of their, member of their team.
Is
So
that
they
an unfair advantage or is that a very fair, secured advantage?
Well, what it does, Mary Ellen, is it skews the numbers. Okay, so
Okay.
if you have Prince Harry and I don't, I don't have anybody, then they're always going to look better in share of voice than. But I think probably looking at share of voice is more important. I also look at PR as an insurance policy. And this is where it can be extremely helpful. And again, I won't name brands, but when there is an issue, when there is a crisis, so a crisis could be a cybersecurity breach. A crisis could be a disgruntled former employee. There's all different ways a crisis manifests itself. It could be a terrorist attack. It could be a military situation. I mean, you really don't know. It depends on your footprint or your global company. There are a lot of factors. But when there is a crisis, you need to know that you have advocates in the press that you can turn to who are going to help you through this period of time. And that's where those relationships are super important. And I know I've just kind of opened up a big, big Pandora's box here, but I do think that is one aspect of PR that sometimes doesn't translate when we're looking at PR through a marketing lens.
It's true. This is where it starts to turn into investor relations too.
Yes.
One of the conversations that when I talk about this topic with folks is when we look at your share price, if you're publicly traded, one. And also, more if you're VC backed and PE backed, this also becomes a factor, but it's very easy when you're publicly traded. Sentiment analysis is a factor. Like the
Yes.
Bloomberg terminal, I can go pull who has had negative and positive sentiment. I can look at Twitter mentions, and sophisticated investors look at all of those things in evaluating whether to downgrade your
Exactly.
stock, or it's if you're thinking about what might shape we were talking about analyst earlier. Analysts, you want a relationship with an analyst. Yes, analyst relationships is a whole kind of bucket, and we can talk about that for a minute. But even those analysts pay attention to your regular press mentions. And they
Yes.
do it in a qualitative sense and a quantitative sense. They are measuring what people are saying about you. And while that's not a super big deal on a tiny little startup, if you're a publicly traded company, it absolutely is.
And think, so you've just raised such a good point. Think about, what a dollar variance in share price can mean to your institutional investors. So, we're talking about a lot of effort goes into wooing and engaging shareholders, uh, engaging and getting in front of investors who are going to invest in your company. If you're out on a roadshow for venture capital, think about what it looks like to all of them if your press room at your website hasn't had a new piece of news since August of 2019. I mean, seriously, if you're a player, then you need to get in the game. You need to be all in, and you can't be afraid. You know what? That's the other element that I hear. People will be like, "Oh, well, someone could write something bad about us."
They
Yes,
can do
they
that
could.
now.
Yes, they could. They can do that now without you having a PR program. And guess what? Yeah, there could be one bad article, but there could be 99 great articles that you can then parlay into assets that you can use across social, in sales kits, in investor presentations, at your website for SEO. I mean, my gosh, what are you waiting for? I'm always amazed when people get into this whole risk conversation and, oh, well, we'll just say nothing. Well, if you say nothing, then no one knows you're there.
Or again, I will say when I was a reporter, one of the things that I was taught is if I was writing about someone, whoever I was writing a story about was actually the last person I called.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I always tell people this in media
And
training.
if you don't want to talk to me or not, that's fine. I mean,
Right.
and I think and I learned this pretty early because I found that I would write these profiles in my column, in the career advice column, and I would, if I asked somebody in an interview what their age was, the odds that I would get a straightforward, accurate answer were pretty low. And I soon learned that the real way to do this is go to public records, find out how old they are, and then
Exactly.
in the call I say, it says that you're whatever in this age. Is that accurate? Like, there's no way to get around that. So by the time I'm interviewing you, by the time the current me is interviewing you, it's done.
Right. Exactly.
Like it's done.
Exactly.
If it's a
You're
bad
maybe
story.
you're maybe looking for a fresh quote, or I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, some maybe position it for a phantom adversary and get a great juicy quote out of them. Yeah, we train our clients on this because they think that, hey, I did a 1 hour interview with XYZ journalist. We're going to have this great full feature. And then the feature comes out and they are one sentence
Yeah.
in the article. And they're like, well, this is terrible. This is awful. And I'm like, listen, first of all, you're an editorial resource. They are going to your competitors. They're going to their buddies at Gartner. They're going to your website. They're doing research. I mean, journalists are not just sitting there waiting for you. It just doesn't work that way.
No,
And then,
no.
and especially as you move up the editorial pyramid and you're trying to get on broadcast or you're trying to get in, Forbes, Fortune, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, they have a lot of options. So,
Mhm.
again, you either get in the game or you're going to be sitting by the sidelines watching your competition get the coverage.
Mm. So this reminds me of a question that came up actually I was in a LinkedIn discussion yesterday, and they were talking about press releases, and this person was declaring the news wires dead. And I was like, well, unless you're a publicly traded company with material news to share, and this is the fastest way you can do this, I was curious from your perspective, how do you decide when something is worth one putting out a press release, which is not the same as PR? PR is a much
That's
bigger
right.
bucket. A
That's right.
press release is a tool in that PR
Exactly.
toolkit. And when is it, to take it up another notch, worth it putting it out on one of the wires? What's your criteria for that?
So, you know, we look at news, not noise. Um, I've seen a lot of companies who really overwork the wire. And, they'll put out like 50 press releases a year. And they think that somehow that is shaping opinions of the company or that it's shaping press relationships. What it does is it gives you a little boost from an SEO standpoint. I mean, you're again, it's kind of like Twitter. You're having some control over what you're saying. You have some immediacy, you know exactly what time it's going out. But if you get noisy, people don't want to hear from you anymore. So we really look at the quality of the story that's being told. We also look through what I would call the reality lens. And this is where sometimes, a client is, they're all speaking to each other internally day in and day out and have certain lingo they use, and certain things are very important to them. Maybe they've scored a new hire that's a very prominent executive. Yeah, we can disclose that. We can put that on the wire, nice photo of the person makes everyone feel good. Sometimes it's for that person's career. It's also for your employees to see that this is an important announcement to the company, but you're not going to get press coverage. You might hear from some of the business journals, and I'm talking about, the city business journals that now want to charge you $495 to run your people news in their people in the news section, but you're not really shaping opinions. So we do try not to overwork the wire angle, but it is a viable means of getting news out into the market. It's also a wired press release is a legal document that stands up in court. So
Mhm.
sometimes we're doing it for that very reason. If we are going through, let's say, the trademark journey, we want to show first instance that we have used this phrase or term, in a public forum. So we'll use it. We'll do it for that reason.
Yeah, that's how I would think. I think of it as material news, is what I tell them. It's like, does
Exactly.
this have the ability to actually affect the value of this company?
Right.
If yes, put it on the wire. If no, don't put it on the wire.
Yeah, yeah. And,
It's a waste of money.
exactly. I mean, sometimes what we do is, it's a great story, but it's a story. It's not really news. I also explain to clients, there are news editors. That's their job is they do news, but then there are the journalists who are writing the features. They're writing the
Mhm,
longer form content. So maybe we give it to the story to one of them as an exclusive, or that way it's a more targeted placement. It's what we call narrowcast versus broadcast, but
mhm,
we still get the message out to the market.
mhm. And that's the type of writing that I did. And I was
Mhm.
always looking for new angles and new stories. And I loved coming across people that had perspectives that I hadn't heard before. So
Yes.
that, and I will say that was another way that I would use the press releases. So I would get all these press releases and I would delete anything that was like, no, definitely not that, definitely not that. And a lot of other things I just archived.
Hmm.
And I would go back, and when I
Exactly.
got around to writing a story about something, I would go searching. Do I have an expert on this topic? Let me go
Exactly.
see. That's the first place I went.
Yeah.
I didn't go to, I mean, it was
That
that
happens
was
a lot. That
mhm.
happens a lot. And that's what I say about, it's PR can be the darndest thing because we can hear from somebody. Sometimes I've heard from a journalist like 3 years after the fact. Well, they'll be like, "Do you still represent XYZ company? Because, I'm going to write about this topic now." And of course, I sit there. Sometimes I'm
Right.
thrilled because we have very long term client relationships, and oftentimes they are still in the client portfolio. But sometimes that company has gone through a corporate action like M&A or something, and it's just not a viable angle anymore. It's kind of sad when opportunity doesn't
You're like,
quite
I have
meet.
someone
Yeah.
else. You're
Yes.
like, I have
Well,
somebody
oh,
else.
that
Hold
does
on, hold
happen.
on.
Does happen. We have been known to do that because, a good story is a good story, and we always want to make sure that we're working with our media partners, our journalists to help them as much as possible. Sometimes,
Hmm.
by the way, we help them with things that don't put money in our pocket. Because again, you're building relationships. Not everything has to have a dollar sign on it.
Absolutely. So let's take the last few minutes to talk about PR and content marketing, how they
Hmm.
work together, because we've
Yeah.
been kind of talking about the PR side. We talked about the content piece a little bit, but you and I sometimes collaborate on the
Yes.
same clients. We refer,
Yes.
not only sometimes we refer people to each other if the right fit is PR versus content and vice versa, but sometimes we're literally sitting on the same team, or
Yes.
you're sitting with someone like me and vice versa. So I'm curious, coming from your perspective, how does content marketing, if a company has a good content marketing team, a good content marketing program rolling, how does that affect what you do in PR? How does that, you can tell how it makes your job easier or harder? Like, what does it mean?
So much easier. Oh my gosh. I can't begin to tell you. I don't know how many times in any given week I say to a client, may I see your content calendar? Because, if there is a great content marketing program, and to your point, you and I, our firms have collaborated. And let me just back up for a moment. I'm fascinated that companies don't realize that agencies collaborate with each other all the time. That there's This
Right?
is our world. There is no, like, it's not like an either or. It's like, this is what we do. We don't
Yeah.
withhold. We're there to work in your best interest, Mr. or Ms. Client. So, I mean, for us, this is normal. But, if I know there's a great content marketing program in place, you've already made my job easier because that means you've vetted certain storylines, you've developed certain content that, while we can't necessarily lift and place as is because of copyright, if something's been published to the blog already, for example, we can't take it as is because it's copyrighted. The blog is copyrighted, but we can take the essence of the content and we can use it for a pitch. And oftentimes it can result in contributed articles. For that client that then can come back through the content marketing machine, and your team writes those articles. So it's a really it's a well integrated dance. It's really my favorite scenario. It's when things are siloed, or people feel they have to make decisions either or, that's not wise. I'll leave it
Hmm.
there.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. I think it is interesting that, because I think some agencies don't work that way. I think that the traditional full service agency model, like, people try to go for the whole thing. Like, they
Mm,
want the whole thing, and then there's this whole dance of like, people, oh, I want to do that part. I could only do this part if I do that part. It's like, but you and I both, we have our lanes, and there's some overlap. Certainly, y'all can produce content. You make fine content. I mean, you don't want to make it at scale the way we do, and we do a little
no,
bit of PR, but I
right,
don't want to do PR at scale. Like,
right,
so, like, we're,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. We
So,
all have our core offerings. If a client says to us, "Listen, we need a 400-word blog post," yes, we can do that. But is that our reason for being? No. Our reason for being is, scoring that feature for you in Wall Street Journal. So
mhm.
we all have, we've also staffed, each firm is staffed accordingly. So, you've got writers on your team. I have people who do media pitching and do speaker placements. So it's, you also have to look at the staff strengths.
Uh-huh.
Um, but yeah, I'm always fascinated by the large agencies that say they can do everything because they can't. They just can't. It's and I run into this, with some frequency, and sometimes clients will abandon us and go to them and then come back to us. Actually have a folder here a shared folder here at Devon that's titled Boomerang Clients for that very reason, because a
Right.
large agency cannot give you the attention you need. Because when you are with a large agency, it's about them, it's not about you. It's not about the client, it's about fitting into the agency's model and their levels of bureaucracy and their processes and procedures. When you work with a smaller firm, we are offering bespoke services that match to what is most important to you as a client. I do always warn people we're a bit intense, and I know you're intense too. So, you know, some people are frightened by that.
Right. No, no,
I,
no. It is true. I need to put that down. I probably
yeah,
should put that on the website
yeah.
too. Like, we're intense.
We're intense.
Warning. We're
We're
intense.
intense.
Like,
I also do not have seasons tickets to any sporting events. So I am not the right agency if I can't do it. I just can't do it. I'm working. I don't get out. I'm working all the time. So
that's
yeah,
funny.
that we warn people. Every chemistry is important. You have to
Hmm.
have the commitment and the simpatico between the
Hmm.
the resources.
I think I like to match it. It's like there's certain types of companies that do need a bigger agency. There's
Yes.
there's there's situations that I'm like, I mean, I would think about another. We haven't mentioned them in here, but like Star Conspiracy is more of a comprehensive agency in our
Mhm.
space. And if somebody comes to me and what they're doing is going to involve a big, massive ad buy,
Yes.
I can't help them. Like,
We
I'm
don't
not
do
going to
that
do that.
either.
And
Right,
here you go
right.
call my buddy Brett Starr.
Exactly. Media buying, if you need a media
Nope.
buy, go to
Yeah.
Star. Exactly. It's,
Um,
and again, I think it's important, as agency, principles that we know what our strengths are. And what I love about the HR tech space especially is we are very collegial and collaborative, and for the most part, we've all worked with each other in some scenario. So,
mhm,
we are able to do handoffs and be very productive between the different agencies serving the category.
mhm. So I think I've got a question here from Laura about how to repurpose rejected or ghosted PR pitches, which actually comes to I was going to say a little bit about like why I like as a content marketer when I come in and I've got a good PR partner.
Mhm,
To me, that's another channel to amplify the idea because
mhm,
fundamentally I'm about how do we get an idea out, and content just happens to be my preferred toolkit for
mhm,
spreading an idea. And so if I have PR, that gives me another lane to amplify that and spread it.
mhm.
And then kind of vice versa. And then my answer to this, and we can see if Jeanne, if you want to add anything to it, is if I pitch something and it doesn't get picked up. So one, I ask myself, why didn't it get picked up? Because if it didn't get picked up because it's not very interesting, like then repurposing it and running it on our blog, that isn't going to do us any favors either.
Right.
If it didn't get picked up because of bad timing, like say like the chat GPT example I mentioned
Mhm.
earlier, it's like if it just got buried in a news cycle, then by all means go ahead and like let's repurpose it and put it somewhere else, right? Let's take that same idea, but ideally you had a content plan
Mhm.
like to launch your idea, your campaign, and it had your PR. I'm going to pitch this article and I'm going to do these things. And so you're going to keep pitching until you find the right home, but I'd want to know why it was rejected, because some
Yeah.
rejection is a signal from the market. Did you not position it right, or was it not good?
I mentioned that I was in sales earlier in my career, and I think rejection is so important because that's tangible feedback that enables you to either put a finer point on what you're trying to do or realize that you're being sent a message by the universe that you should be taking this in a different direction or sunsetting it altogether. Sometimes just because you want to say it doesn't mean anyone wants to hear it. And so that's really important. We encourage clients to use a calibration scale to determine what is important to them in terms of audience retention, audience development, what they're hearing in the sales cycle, what's coming out of product in terms of that roadmap. So taking a very calculated approach and not just putting things out. For example, um, there was a pitch going around, and the journalists actually were making fun of this pitch. This is not from a Devon client. I don't want to name the company or the agency behind the pitch, but it was something along the lines of the following: managers are now hiring by zodiac sign. Well, when this first got forwarded to me, and it was tongue in cheek, kind of someone forwarded it to me like, do you believe this? And I read it and I said, well, this has got to be a joke, right? Well, it wasn't a joke. It was a legitimate pitch that was going out. And what was happening is it, of course, was falling flat because the journalists felt it was ridiculous. That's something you should sunset immediately. When you're seeing that journalists are actually making fun of it on Twitter, that's a sign to sunset that immediately and don't revive it in any form because it didn't resonate.
Right.
Now, you've mentioned ChatGPT. Um, Maybe you don't have a ChatGPT story, but maybe you have a great legal counsel on staff who has some thoughts on, let's say, the New York City law that's been pushed out to mid-April on AI and HR. Maybe that's your swim lane. So again, rejection sometimes is a good thing because it's actually valuable feedback. But I also encourage people, don't get so blinded by your own, bright shiny objects. You need to look externally and read the room. Because if you're not reading the room, you could really be perceived as the vendor who's tone deaf out there.
Yeah. Does that help, Laura? Does that help address
I
your
don't know,
question?
Laura. That might have been more of an answer than
I
Laura
know,
was
right?
was looking
Like,
for.
to me, but I think that's a really good example though of like why. Like I want to know why it's being rejected. So if it's getting rejected because it's bad timing or just that media person doesn't need it, like yeah, keep shipping it, keep pitching it, and then if that doesn't work, then publish it on your own stuff. But
Right.
if nobody's interested, you should ask yourself why no one's interested. It's like
Exactly.
astrology for no one's doing
Astrology for
that. No one's
HR.
doing
Yeah.
that. Like,
I was like, really? Like a Sagittarius is a better employee than a Taurus? I never thought of this. And I've been in business a long time. That was a new one on me, though. I will say that much.
yeah, no, that's like I think the only way I would do like that an April Fool's joke that's from one of the
Exactly.
assessment
Right.
companies because that
Yeah.
would be funny. Like,
That's creative, Mary Ellen. This is exactly why people need to hire you.
yeah, no, that would be the twist. So I think we're gonna wrap up here. We got 2 minutes. I see
Yeah.
Grace is being awesome and dropping our LinkedIn profiles into the chat, so you can feel free to follow
Oh.
up with us if you like. Happy to talk about this stuff anytime. Do you have any parting words, Jeanne? Like if you can give people one piece of advice when it comes to thinking about what to do with their PR program in this weird economy, because I'm not even going to call it is it a recession? Is it a downturn? I don't know. That jobs report was the weirdest. Nobody expected that jobs report. Like, that was like, what
Yeah.
do you do? Give me one bit of advice. What do you do in
Um,
this environment? Like,
so this is actually in any environment. Define your audience. Define your ICP. Talk to an audience. Don't just put things out there. Don't throw things over the transom and hope they stick. Take a look at who is your customer. Um, who do you want to be your customer, and start to talk to them. I mentioned the Wall Street Journal earlier, and from a PR standpoint, everyone gets very excited when a client has an article in the Wall Street Journal. But if your primary customer is that healthcare TA lead, you need to be in a healthcare trade. So
mhm.
know your audience. Make sure you've defined your audience before you start really any outreach program.
It is all about audience. It is all, and people forget that there's two audiences in play with the media. There is your audience, the media person, the journalist, whether it's an editor or a writer, and there's their audience
Hmm.
and their boss, and they have so they're also serving multiple things. Oh, I do have a quick question. We are done, but I wanted to ask you about pay for play because this comes up a lot.
Yes.
Do you consider that PR, and
No,
when should people do it?
they shouldn't. First of all, there's a lot of spammy stuff out there. And a lot of what we call vanity PR, where you for $1,500 can be on the cover of some publication that has absolutely no readership, but it will make someone feel good that they were a cover. We're not big fans of pay for play. Their sponsored content does have its place, but in higher profile publications that have media kits, that you could actually take a look at who you're reaching, what the demographics of the audience are.
Mhm.
I would say please stay away from some of these spammier pay for play
Mhm.
situations.
I think there's a ton of them in HR tech in particular, and they
There
are
are.
worthless. And
Yes.
the moment that you go, here's the other thing that'll happen when you put that thing out on the wire about how you got funded, you should
Oh,
expect to have like hundreds
exactly.
of just to be bombarded. That's not PR. It's not
Right.
earned. PR is
Right.
earned.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
not bought. So put it in the ad budget. Don't tell me it's PR. All right. Thank you so much, Jeanne, for coming and spending this hour with us. I really enjoyed this conversation as always. And thanks everybody for joining us as well. We'll have the recording available on demand, probably it should be by tomorrow. If not later today, definitely by tomorrow. So you can come back and follow us and send us your additional questions.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your
Okay.
time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.